The gunshot cracked through the dusty afternoon air of Murphy's, California, and every man watching flinched as the glass bottle exploded into 1,000 glittering fragments. But Georgia Zimmerman just smiled and lowered her Colt revolver with the same easy grace she might use to set down a teacup. It was August of 1878, and the mining town nestled in the Sierra Nevada foothills had seen its share of rough characters and skilled shooters, but nobody had ever seen anything quite like Georgia. She stood in the middle of Main Street, her dark hair pinned back in a practical bun that still managed to look elegant, her calico dress dusty from the road, but her shoulders squared with confidence. At 22 years old, she had been shooting since she was tall enough to hold her father's rifle steady. And in the 5 months since she had arrived in Murphy's to help her aging uncle run his general store, she had already become something of a legend. "That is 5 out of 5, called out Marcus Hendricks, the barrel-chested blacksmith who had organized the impromptu shooting competition. "Anyone else want to try and beat Miss Zimmerman?" The crowd of miners, ranch hands, and townspeople who had gathered to watch shifted their feet in the dirt, but nobody stepped forward. Georgia had already outshot the best marksmen in town, including the deputy sheriff and a former cavalry scout who swore he had never seen better shooting outside of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show performers. "Well then," Georgia said, her voice carrying a warmth that softened the sting of defeat for the men she had bested. "I appreciate you all letting me participate. The prize money will help my uncle quite a bit with restocking the store inventory." She walked over to collect her winnings from Marcus, 20 silver dollars that clinked pleasantly in the small cloth bag he handed her. The crowd began to disperse, heading toward the saloons and shops that lined the wooden sidewalks. Georgia was tucking the money into her pocket when she heard a voice behind her that she did not recognize. "Miss Zimmerman?" She turned to find a cowboy standing there, his hat in his hands and an expression of such earnest determination on his face that she almost laughed. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His clothes marked him as a working ranch hand, worn denim and a faded blue shirt that had been mended more than once. But his eyes caught her attention most, a striking hazel that seemed to shift between green and gold in the afternoon light. "Yes?" she said, tilting her head slightly. "My name is William Garrett," he said, and she noticed he had a slight drawl that suggested he had come from somewhere south, maybe Texas or Oklahoma territory. "I have been watching you shoot, and well, I have never seen anything like it in all my life." "That is kind of you to say, Mr. Garrett. Please, call me Will." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly nervous but pushing through it. "I was wondering if maybe you might consider something." "What would that be?" He looked her straight in the eye then, and she saw steel beneath the nervousness. "Will you teach me to shoot like that? Or maybe you would consider marrying me instead, or possibly both." Georgia blinked, certain she had misheard him. "I beg your pardon?" A flush crept up his neck, but he did not back down. "I know it sounds forward, and I apologize for that, but I have been working on the Crawford Ranch for near about 6 months now, saving every penny, trying to build something for myself. I am a decent hand with cattle and horses, but my shooting is barely adequate. In this country, being able to shoot well could mean the difference between life and death." "And the marriage proposal?" Georgia asked, raising one eyebrow. "Well," Will said, and now a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "That is maybe getting ahead of myself, but I figured if I was already being bold enough to ask a lady to teach me something, I might as well put all my cards on the table. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, Miss Zimmerman, and I would count myself lucky just to spend time in your company, whether that is learning to shoot or courting you proper or both." Despite herself, Georgia felt a smile tugging at her own lips. There was something refreshing about his honesty, his willingness to lay himself bare like that. Most men in town either avoided her because her skill with a gun made them uncomfortable, or they treated her like some kind of curiosity. But Will Garrett looked at her like she was simply a person he wanted to know better. "Mr. Garrett," she said slowly, "Will, I appreciate your directness truly. As for teaching you to shoot, I suppose I could do that. I charge 50 cents a lesson, and you would need to provide your own ammunition." "That is more than fair," he said quickly. "As for the other matter," she continued, and she let herself smile fully now, "why do you not start with the shooting lessons, and we will see where things go from there?" The grin that spread across his face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. That sounds just about perfect to me. When can we start? Tomorrow morning, an hour past dawn. There is a clearing about a half-mile north of town, just past the old Stevenson claim. Do you know it? I will find it, he promised. Bring your sidearm and whatever rifle you have. We will see what you are working with. Yes, madam. He started to turn away, then stopped. Miss Zimmerman, thank you, truly. She watched him walk away, noting the easy confidence in his stride despite the nervousness he had shown moments before. Her uncle was going to have something to say about this, she was certain. Samuel Zimmerman had been protective of his niece since she arrived from Sacramento, where she had been living with her mother after her father passed. Her mother had remarried quickly to a man Georgia could not abide, and when Uncle Samuel wrote offering her a place in Murphy's, she had packed her belongings and caught the next stage. The store was quiet when she entered through the back door, the bell jingling softly. Uncle Samuel looked up from where he was organizing tins of peaches on a shelf. He was a spare man in his 60s, with white hair and shrewd blue eyes that missed very little. I heard you won the shooting contest, he said. $20, Georgia confirmed, placing the bag of coins on the counter. That should help with the order from San Francisco. You are a blessing, girl. He studied her face. Something else happened, though. I can see it in your eyes. Georgia laughed and shook her head. You know me too well, Uncle. A cowboy approached me after the contest. His name is William Garrett, and he asked me to teach him to shoot. And he also asked me to marry him. Uncle Samuel's eyebrows shot up. That was bold of him. I told him we would start with shooting lessons and see where things went. Georgia busied herself with straightening some fabric bolts that did not really need straightening. He seemed sincere, Uncle, not like some of the others who treat me like a performing animal. Will Garrett, Uncle Samuel mused. Works for Tom Crawford. Does he not? He said he has been at the Crawford Ranch for 6 months. Tom speaks well of his hands, says this Garrett fellow is one of the best he has ever had with horses. Uncle Samuel came around the counter and placed a gentle hand on his niece's shoulder. You have a good head on your shoulders, Georgia. I trust your judgment. But be careful with your heart. It is a precious thing. She covered his hand with her own. I will be careful, Uncle. I promise. That night, lying in her small bedroom above the store, Georgia found herself thinking about Will Garrett's hazel eyes and honest smile. She had not been looking for romance when she came to Murphy's. Her father's death 2 years ago had left her devastated, and her mother's hasty remarriage had felt like a betrayal. Georgia had thrown herself into learning the skills her father had taught her, becoming exceptional with firearms, in part because it was a connection to his memory. He had been a deputy marshal in Sacramento, a man who believed his daughter deserved to know how to protect herself in a world that was not always kind to women. But maybe, she thought as she drifted off to sleep, maybe she could honor her father's memory and still open her heart to something new. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the California sun already warming the air by the time Georgia made her way to the clearing. She arrived first and used the time to set up targets, various bottles and cans arranged on fallen logs and rocks. She was checking her Colt revolver when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Will Garrett rode into the clearing on a good-looking bay gelding, and Georgia noticed immediately that he sat his horse well, with the easy balance of someone who spent most of his life in the saddle. He dismounted smoothly and tethered the horse in the shade before walking over to her. Good morning, Miss Zimmerman, he said, and she noticed he had made an effort with his appearance. His shirt was clean and pressed, his hair still damp from washing. Good morning, Will. Are you ready to work? Yes, madam. First, let me see your weapons. He unbuckled his gun belt and handed it over. The revolver was a Colt single-action army, well-maintained but showing signs of use. She checked the action and the barrel, nodding with approval. This is a good weapon. Do you clean it regularly? Every week, whether I have fired it or not. Good. That will save your life someday. She handed it back. Now, show me your draw. Will strapped the gun belt back on and positioned himself, then drew the revolver in a motion that was competent but not particularly fast. Georgia watched carefully, noting the slight hitch in his movement, the way his thumb fumbled just a bit with the hammer. Again, she said. He holstered and drew again. And again. After the 5th time, she held up a hand. Your mechanics are decent, but you are thinking too much. Drawing a weapon needs to be as natural as breathing. You cannot be wondering if you are doing it right in the moment you need it. She stepped closer. May I? At his nod, she adjusted his stance slightly, moving his right foot back a few inches. This gives you better balance, and when you draw, do not grab for the gun. Let your hand fall naturally to it, like you are greeting an old friend. She demonstrated with her own Colt the movement so fluid and fast that the gun seemed to simply appear in her hand. See? No wasted motion. For the next hour, she worked with him on his draw, correcting small errors, encouraging him when he improved. She was impressed by how seriously he took her instruction, never making excuses or acting as though he knew better. When men back in Sacramento had asked her father for shooting tips, they often bristled at criticism, but Will listened to every word she said and worked to implement her suggestions. "Now, let us see you shoot," she said finally. She stood behind him as he aimed at a bottle about 20 feet away. He took his time sighting down the barrel, then squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt a foot to the left of the target. "You are anticipating the recoil," Georgia said, "flinching before you fire. That throws off your aim." "How do I stop doing that?" "Practice and trust. You have to trust that you can control the weapon, not the other way around." She moved to stand beside him. "Try again, but this time, focus on your breathing. Take a breath, let half of it out, and squeeze the trigger while your lungs are still." He followed her instruction, and this time the bottle shattered. His face lit up with surprised pleasure. "There," Georgia said, smiling. "You can do it when you trust yourself." They spent another hour working on his accuracy, and by the time the sun was high overhead, Will had improved noticeably. He was not going to win any competitions, but he was hitting his targets more often than missing them. "That is enough for today," Georgia said, wiping sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. "You did well, Will, better than I expected for a first lesson. I had a good teacher." He reloaded his revolver and holstered it carefully. "When can we do this again?" "Same time tomorrow, if you can manage it. I will be here." He hesitated, then said, "Miss Zimmerman, I was wondering if maybe after we finish tomorrow, you might let me buy you lunch at the hotel restaurant, as a thank you for the lessons." Georgia pretended to consider this, though her mind was already made up. "That would be acceptable, provided you understand it is just lunch." "Of course," he said quickly. "Just lunch. Nothing presumptuous?" She gathered her equipment and they walked together back toward town, leading his horse. They talked easily, and Georgia found herself enjoying his company. He told her about growing up in Texas, the youngest of 4 boys, and how he had headed west after his parents died of influenza. He spoke matter-of-factly about hardship without seeking pity, and she appreciated that. "What about you?" he asked. "How did you become such an incredible shot?" "My father taught me," she said, and she was pleased to find that talking about him did not hurt quite as much as it used to. He was a deputy marshal, and he believed that everyone in his family should know how to handle firearms safely. "My mother hated it, thought it was unladylike, but Papa insisted. He sounds like a wise man." "He was." She glanced at Will. "He died 2 years ago, shot by a man he was trying to arrest peacefully. The man had been drinking and just started firing." "I am sorry," Will said quietly. "That must have been terrible." "It was, and then my mother remarried within 6 months to a man who told me I needed to put away my father's guns and act like a proper young lady. I lasted 3 months in that house before Uncle Samuel offered me a way out." "I am glad you came to Murphy's," Will said, "even if that is selfish of me to say." She looked at him and saw sincerity in his expression. "I am beginning to think I am glad too." Over the next 2 weeks, Georgia and Will fell into a comfortable routine. They met every morning for shooting lessons, and his skill improved steadily under her patient instruction. After each lesson, they would walk back to town together, sometimes stopping for lunch, sometimes just sitting in the shade outside her uncle's store and talking. Georgia found herself looking forward to those mornings more than she wanted to admit. Will was easy to be with, quick to laugh, but serious when the situation called for it. He asked her opinions and actually listened to her answers, something she had found rare in men. He told her about his dreams of saving enough money to buy his own small ranch, maybe up in the mountains where the grazing was good, and the summers were not so brutal. "I am not looking to become rich," he said one afternoon, as they sat on the wooden bench outside the store. "I just want something that is mine, you know? A place to build a life." "That sounds nice," Georgia said softly. "What would you run, cattle or horses?" "Horses, I think. I have always had a way with them, and there is good money in breeding quality stock." He turned to look at her. "What about you? What do you want, Georgia?" She was startled by the question. Most people assume they knew what a woman wanted, marriage and children, and not much else. But Will was genuinely asking, wanting to know her thoughts. "I want to make my own choices," she said slowly. "I want to not have to depend on anyone else for my survival. My mother was lost when my father died, could not even manage the household accounts because he had always done it. Then she married a man she did not love just to have someone take care of her. I do not want that." "You want independence," Will said. "Yes, but—" She hesitated, then decided to be honest. "But I also do not want to be alone forever. I want someone who sees me as a partner, not property." "Anyone who saw you as anything less than an equal would be a fool," Will said firmly. It was in that moment, sitting on a dusty bench in the afternoon heat, that Georgia felt something shift in her chest. She was falling for Will Garrett, and the realization both thrilled and terrified her. The shooting lessons continued, but they became something more now. Will was a competent shooter, but Georgia kept finding reasons to schedule more sessions. And Will, she noticed, never complained about paying for lessons he probably did not need anymore. They were excuses to spend time together, and they both knew it. One morning in early September, they finished their practice and Will said, "I have the day off tomorrow. Tom gave the hands a break since we finished the fall roundup ahead of schedule. I was thinking of riding up to the old Mercer place, seeing if there are any trout in the creek up there. Would you like to come with me?" "Are you asking me on a picnic, Will Garrett?" "I suppose I am," he said, meeting her eyes. "If you would like to go." "I would like that very much." Uncle Samuel packed them a basket the next morning, giving Georgia a knowing look that made her blush. "You be back before dark," he said. "And Georgia? That young man has honest eyes. I like him." "So do I, Uncle," she admitted. "So do I." The ride to the old Mercer place took about an hour, following a winding trail up into the foothills. The air was cooler here, scented with pine and the dusty sweet smell of California wildflowers. The creek was exactly where Will remembered it, a clear stream running over smooth stones and creating little pools perfect for trout. They tied their horses in the shade, and Will produced 2 fishing lines from his saddlebag. "I thought we could catch our lunch," he said. Georgia had not been fishing since she was a little girl, but the skill came back quickly. They sat side by side on the creek bank, their shoulders almost touching, and talked about everything and nothing. Will told her about learning to rope cattle, about the time a spooked horse dragged him a quarter mile through prickly pear cactus. She told him about her childhood in Sacramento, about the time she accidentally shot a hole through her father's favorite hat while practicing her draw. "He must have been furious," Will said, laughing. "Actually, he just patched the hat and kept wearing it. Said it reminded him to never stand downrange of someone learning to shoot." They caught 3 good-sized trout, and Will cleaned them expertly while Georgia gathered wood for a fire. They cooked the fish on sticks over the flames, and Georgia could not remember when food had ever tasted better. Maybe it was the fresh air and the exercise, or maybe it was the company. After they ate, they lay back in the grass and watched clouds drift across the brilliant blue sky. Georgia was acutely aware of Will's presence beside her, of the warmth radiating from his body in the cool mountain air. "Georgia," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That first day, when I asked if you would teach me or marry me or both, you said to start with the lessons and see where things went." He propped himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "I am hoping things have gone somewhere, because I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know that." Her breath caught in her throat. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble under her palm. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. He leaned down and kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Georgia felt like something inside her that had been tightly closed since her father's death was finally opening up again, letting light and warmth back in. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling. "So," Will said, "does this mean you will marry me?" "Will Garrett, you have not even properly courted me yet," she said, laughing. "Give it a little time." "How much time?" "Ask me again at Christmas," she said, "if you still want to by then." "I will still want to," he said with certainty. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, talking and kissing and making plans. Will told her about a piece of land he had his eye on, 160 acres about 5 miles north of town, with good water and grazing. He had been saving his wages and thought he would have enough for a down payment by spring. "If you wanted," he said carefully, "you could come see it with me, help me decide if it is worth pursuing." "I would like that," Georgia said. They rode back to Murphy's as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. When they reached the store, Will helped Georgia down from her horse and held her hand for a long moment. "Thank you for today," he said. "It was perfect." "Yes," she agreed. "It was." Uncle Samuel was waiting when she came inside, pretending to work on the account books, but fooling no one. "Have a nice time?" he asked innocently. "Uncle, you are not subtle," Georgia said, but she was smiling. "Yes, I had a wonderful time. And before you ask, yes, he kissed me, and yes, I kissed him back." "Georgia Zimmerman," Uncle Samuel said, but he was grinning. "I raised you better than to kiss before you were properly engaged." "No, you raised me to make my own choices," she countered, "and I choose Will Garrett." Over the next few months, Murphy's got used to seeing Georgia and Will together. They continued their shooting practice, though now it was clearly just an excuse to spend time together. Will proved to have a good eye for business, and he started helping out at the store on his days off, using his strength to move heavy crates and his easy manner to charm customers. Uncle Samuel approved wholeheartedly. "He is a good man," he told Georgia one evening, "the kind who will stand by you in hard times." "I know, Uncle." In October, Will took Georgia to see the land he wanted to buy. They rode out early one morning, with the fall air crisp and clear. The property was beautiful, rolling hills covered in grass with a creek running through the eastern section. There was timber for building and a spot that would be perfect for a house, situated to catch the morning sun and the evening breeze. "What do you think?" Will asked nervously. Georgia turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. She could see it so clearly, the house they would build, the corrals for horses, maybe a garden near the creek. "I think it is perfect," she said. "I think you should buy it." He said. "I think we should buy it." She looked at him. "Will, you have not asked me yet." "I am waiting until Christmas, like you told me to," he said. "But I know what your answer will be. I can see it in your eyes." He was right, of course. She already knew she would say yes when he asked. But she appreciated that he was giving her the time she had requested, not pushing or presuming. In November, the first real cold snap hit Murphy's, and with it came trouble. A group of drifters rode into town, 6 rough-looking men, who set up camp on the edge of town and immediately started causing problems. They got drunk at the saloon and started fights, harassed women on the street, and stole from Old Man Peterson's chicken coop. Deputy Sheriff Martin tried to run them off, but the leader, a mean-eyed man named Jack Holloway, just laughed at him. "This is public land," he said. "We got as much right to be here as anyone." The town was on edge, and Georgia noticed that women were not going out alone anymore. She kept her colt on her at all times and walked with her hand near it. It was a cold afternoon in late November when things came to a head. Georgia was closing up the store by herself, Uncle Samuel having gone to Sacramento for supplies. She was locking the front door when she heard footsteps behind her. "Well now, if it is not the shooting girl," said a voice that made her skin crawl. She turned to find Jack Holloway and 2 of his men blocking the sidewalk. They smelled of whiskey and unwashed bodies. "Gentlemen," she said coolly, "can I help you with something?" "We heard you were pretty good with that gun," Holloway said, stepping closer. "Thought maybe you could give us a private demonstration." "The store is closed," Georgia said, "and I do not give demonstrations. Good evening." She tried to step around them, but one of the other men moved to block her path. "Now, that is not very friendly," he said. Georgia's hand moved to her Colt. "I am going to ask you once to step aside and let me pass." Holloway laughed. "Or what? You will shoot us? I do not think so, little girl." "You should listen to her," said a new voice. They all turned to see Will standing there, his hand resting on his own gun. He must have just finished work, still covered in dust from the range, but there was nothing casual about his stance or the look in his eyes. "This does not concern you, Cowboy," Holloway said. "Anything concerning Miss Zimmerman concerns me," Will said evenly, "and I am asking you politely to step away from her. Or what? Or I will make you step away." For a long moment, nobody moved. Georgia's heart was pounding, but she kept her breathing steady, her hand ready. She had seen gunfights before and knew how quickly they could turn deadly. Then Holloway made his choice. He went for his gun, and everything seemed to slow down. Georgia saw Will's hand flash to his Colt with the speed she had taught him, saw the barrel come up smooth and true. But Holloway was fast too, and his gun was already clearing leather. Georgia did not think. Her Colt appeared in her hand and barked once. the shot echoing off the buildings. Holloway's gun fell from his hand as he grabbed his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. His companions froze, their hands still on their undrawn weapons. "The next one goes through your heart," Georgia said calmly, her gun now trained on Holloway's chest. "Will, would you please fetch Deputy Martin?" "On my way," Will said, backing toward the sheriff's office without taking his eyes off the men. Deputy Martin arrived quickly, along with several townsmen who had heard the shot. They arrested Holloway and his companions, and the rest of the drifters were gone by morning, apparently deciding Murphy's was not as easy a target as they had thought. That evening, after giving her statement to the deputy, Georgia sat with Will on the bench outside the store. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline had worn off, and Will held them gently in his own. "That was the first time I ever shot a person," she said quietly. "You saved both our lives," Will said. "Holloway would not have stopped. He was going for a killing shot." "I know, but it still feels strange." "Your father would be proud of you," Will said. "You stayed calm, you did what needed to be done, and you did not shoot to kill when wounding was enough." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I was terrified, Will. When I saw him draw on you, I thought I might lose you before we even had a chance." "But you did not lose me," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I am right here. And Georgia, what you did today, protecting yourself and me, that took real courage." Over the next few weeks, the story of how Georgia Zimmerman shot Jack Holloway spread throughout the county. Some people said she had saved the town from a gang of outlaws. Others embellished the story until Georgia was supposedly facing down a dozen men single-handedly. She laughed off the exaggerations but accepted the gratitude from townspeople who had been genuinely afraid. Will became something of a hero too, though he insisted he had not done anything. "Georgia is the one who made the shot," he kept saying, but people respected that he had stood by her, that he had not tried to take credit or diminish her role. As Christmas approached, Murphy's transformed. Someone brought in a huge pine tree for the town square, and everyone contributed decorations. There were parties planned and church services, a whole week of celebration. Georgia helped organize a Christmas Eve social at the hotel, which would include dinner and dancing. On the morning of Christmas Eve, Will appeared at the store, wearing his best clothes, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished. Uncle Samuel took one look at him and announced he suddenly remembered important business elsewhere, leaving Georgia and Will alone in the store. "You look nice," Georgia said, her heart starting to beat faster. "Thank you. So do you." Will took a deep breath. "Georgia, it has been almost 4 months since that first day when I asked you to teach me or marry me or both. You told me to ask you again at Christmas." "I remember," she said softly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Georgia saw a simple gold ring with a small diamond that caught the morning light. "I bought this with the money I have been saving for the land," he said. "I figured the land could wait, but asking you properly could not." "Oh, Will," she breathed. He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the store. "Georgia Zimmerman, you are the strongest, smartest, most amazing woman I have ever met. You taught me to shoot, you taught me to trust myself, and you taught me what it means to truly love someone. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Georgia said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Will, I will marry you." He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, and then they were kissing and laughing and holding each other. Uncle Samuel chose that moment to reappear, his timing suspiciously perfect. "So," he said, "do I need to start planning a wedding?" "You do, Uncle," Georgia said, beaming. "You really do." The Christmas Eve social that night became an impromptu engagement party. Georgia wore her best dress, a deep green velvet that her uncle had been saving as a Christmas present, and Will could not take his eyes off her. They danced together, and Georgia realized that Will was a good dancer, moving with the same natural grace he showed on horseback. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked as he spun her around the floor. "My mother taught all us boys," he said. "She said any man worth his salt should be able to dance with his wife. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. I wish you could have met her. She would have loved you." They talked about wedding plans as they danced. Neither of them wanted a long engagement. "Spring," Georgia suggested. "April, maybe? That gives us time to plan, but not so long that we have to wait forever." "April sounds perfect," Will agreed. They set the date for the second Saturday in April, which gave them nearly 4 months to prepare. Uncle Samuel offered to pay for the wedding, but Georgia and Will insisted on a simple ceremony. They would use the church in town, have a reception at the hotel, and invite everyone in Murphy's and the surrounding ranches. "Save your money for the ranch," Georgia told Will. "That is more important than a fancy wedding." But Will shook his head. "I talked to the bank, and they will give me a loan for the land. I already made a down payment with part of my savings. We can move on to the property after the wedding and start building our house." "You already bought it?" Georgia asked, surprised. "I put the deposit down yesterday, before I bought your ring. I wanted to make sure I could give you a real home, not just a promise." She kissed him right there in the middle of the dance floor, not caring who saw. "I love you, Will Garrett." "I love you too, Georgia, more than I ever thought possible." The winter months passed in a flurry of preparation. Georgia and Will spent every spare moment at their land, planning where the house would go, where they would build the barn and corrals. Will hired a carpenter from town, and they started work on the house in March, racing to get at least the basic structure completed before the wedding. Georgia worked on her wedding dress with help from several women in town, including Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, who was an excellent seamstress. They used white satin that Uncle Samuel ordered specially from San Francisco, with lace at the collar and sleeves. When Georgia tried it on for the final fitting, she hardly recognized herself in the mirror. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Henderson said warmly. "Will is going to be speechless." The week before the wedding, Will moved his few belongings from the bunkhouse at the Crawford Ranch to the partially completed house on their land. Tom Crawford threw him a bachelor party at the saloon, a rowdy affair that ended with Will being dumped in the horse trough, fully clothed, much to everyone's amusement. "It is tradition," Tom explained, wringing out his own shirt. "Every man getting married in this town gets the trough treatment." "Could have warned me to leave my good boots at home," Will grumbled, but he was grinning. Meanwhile, Georgia was having her own celebration with the women of town. They gathered at the hotel for tea and cake, sharing stories and advice about marriage. Some of it was useful, some was amusing, and some was mortifying. But Georgia appreciated the gesture. These women had become her friends over the past year, and she was grateful for their support. The night before the wedding, Uncle Samuel sat Georgia down for a serious talk. "Your father would be so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have grown into a remarkable woman, Georgia, strong and independent, but also kind and willing to let someone love you. That takes courage, too." "Uncle Samuel, do not make me cry," Georgia said, already feeling tears threatening. "I will have puffy eyes for my wedding. Just one more thing," he said, handing her a small wrapped package. "Your father left this with me before he died, in case anything ever happened to him. He wanted you to have it on your wedding day." With shaking hands, Georgia unwrapped the package to find her father's deputy marshal badge and a letter in his handwriting. She opened it carefully. "My dearest Georgia," it read, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are about to marry. I hope the man you have chosen is worthy of you, though I know no man ever really could be. You have been my greatest joy and my proudest accomplishment. Stay strong, stay true to yourself, and never let anyone make you less than you are. All my love, always. Papa." Georgia clutched the badge and led her to her chest and wept, while Uncle Samuel held her and let her cry. She cried for her father, for all the moments he would miss, but also with gratitude that she had known his love and that it continued to shape her even now. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the April air warm but not yet hot. Georgia woke early and spent time getting ready with Mrs. Henderson and several other women who had come to help. They did her hair in an elaborate updo, woven through with small white flowers from Mrs. Henderson's garden. The dress fit perfectly, and when Georgia looked in the mirror, she felt beautiful and nervous and excited all at once. Uncle Samuel knocked on the door at precisely 11 o'clock, dressed in his finest suit. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," Georgia confirmed. They walked together to the church, where it seemed like every person in Murphy's had gathered. The pews were packed, and people were standing along the walls. Someone had decorated the church with garlands of greenery and more white flowers, and the effect was simple but lovely. And then Georgia saw Will standing at the altar, and everything else faded away. He was wearing a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, and when he saw her, his face lit up with such love and joy that Georgia felt her breath catch. This was right. This was exactly where she was supposed to be. Uncle Samuel walked her down the aisle and placed her hand in Will's. "Take care of her," he whispered. "With my life," Will promised. The ceremony was beautiful. Reverend Patterson spoke about love and partnership, about two people choosing to walk through life together as equals. Georgia and Will exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to honor and respect each other, to face whatever challenges came their way together, to build a life based on trust and honesty. "I promise to always see you as my equal," Will said, his voice clear and strong, "to value your strength and your independence, to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you, but beside you as we build our life together. I promise to trust you with my heart," Georgia said, "to let you love me fully, even when it scares me, to be your partner in all things, in joy and in sorrow, in calm and in storm." When Reverend Patterson pronounced them husband and wife and Will kissed her, the church erupted in cheers and applause. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, and Georgia felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The reception at the hotel was a joyous affair. There was food and music and dancing, and everyone wanted to congratulate the newlyweds. Tom Crawford gave a toast about how Will was the best ranch hand he had ever known, and how he was losing him to an even better woman. Uncle Samuel spoke about watching Georgia grow up, and how grateful he was that she had found someone worthy of her. As the evening wore on and the sun began to set, Will and Georgia slipped away from the party. They rode together to their land, to the house that was not quite finished, but was theirs. Will had spent the previous day making one room completely livable, with a proper bed and curtains on the windows. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrett," he said as he helped her down from her horse. "Home," Georgia repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, this is home." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, and Georgia fell asleep in Will's arms, feeling more content than she ever had in her life. She had been so afraid after her father's death that she would never feel safe or loved again. But Will had changed all that. He had seen her strength and loved her for it, not despite it. The next morning, they woke to bird song and sunshine streaming through the windows. Will made coffee while Georgia changed into practical clothes, and they sat on the front steps of their unfinished house, planning their future. "We need to finish the house," Will said. "Get the barn built before winter, buy some breeding stock." "I thought I might keep helping Uncle Samuel at the store," Georgia said. "At least a few days a week. The extra money would help, and I enjoy the work." "Whatever you want," Will said. "This is your ranch too, Georgia. We make decisions together." Over the next few months, they worked harder than Georgia had ever worked in her life. They finished the house, adding a kitchen and a second bedroom and a covered porch. They built a barn and corrals with help from Tom Crawford and some of Will's former fellow ranch hands. They bought their first horses, a breeding pair that Will swore would produce excellent foals. Georgia divided her time between the ranch and the store, and she found she enjoyed the balance. She loved the physical work of the ranch, the satisfaction of building something with her own hands. But she also loved the social aspect of the store, keeping up with the news and gossip of town. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Will proved to be as good with horses as he had claimed, and their breeding program quickly gained a reputation for quality. Georgia continued to give occasional shooting lessons, earning extra money that went into their savings. They went to church on Sundays, attended town socials, and slowly became pillars of the Murphys' community. In August, a year after that first shooting competition where they had met, the town organized another contest. Georgia had not competed since her wedding, and there was some speculation about whether she was still the best shot in town. "You should enter," Will encouraged her. "Show them you have not lost your touch." "I do not know," Georgia said. "I feel like I have moved past needing to prove myself." "Then do it for fun," he suggested. "Do it because you enjoy it." So Georgia entered, and Will came to watch. The competition was fierce, with several new challengers who had been practicing all year. But when the smoke cleared, Georgia had won by a comfortable margin, hitting 32 out of 35 targets. As she collected her prize money, Will stepped forward with a grin. "That is my wife," he announced proudly to the crowd. "She can outshoot every man in town, and I am the luckiest man alive because she chose me." The crowd laughed and applauded, and Georgia felt a rush of affection for her husband. He was never threatened by her skill, never tried to diminish her accomplishments. He simply loved her for exactly who she was. That fall, Georgia discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when Doc Harrison confirmed it, She felt a mixture of joy and terror. Will's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down gently, worried he had been too rough. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, his face glowing with happiness. "Georgia, we are going to be parents." "Are you ready for this?" she asked, a little nervous. "With you, I am ready for anything." The pregnancy was not easy. Georgia had terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and as she grew larger, the physical work of the ranch became more challenging. But Will was attentive and patient, taking over the heavier tasks and making sure she rested. Uncle Samuel fussed over her, insisting she cut back her hours at the store. In late May, on a warm evening with the scent of wildflowers drifting through the open windows, Georgia went into labor. Will rode into town at breakneck speed to fetch Doc Harrison and Mrs. Henderson, who had assisted at dozens of births. Then he spent the longest night of his life pacing outside the bedroom door while the women worked. When he finally heard the sharp cry of a baby, Will's knees went weak with relief. Mrs. Henderson opened the door, smiling. "Come meet your son," she said. Will entered the room to find Georgia propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but radiantly happy, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. "Will, meet Samuel William Garrett," she said. "Samuel for my uncle, William for you." Will sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at his son's tiny, perfect face. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "You are both beautiful." Little Samuel, who they quickly took to calling Sam, was a healthy, loud baby who kept his parents up at night and filled their home with joy. Will proved to be a natural father, patient with the crying and eager to help with every aspect of Sam's care. Georgia watched him rock their son to sleep and felt her heart overflow with love. Uncle Samuel was completely besotted with his great-nephew and namesake. He spent hours at the ranch, holding the baby and telling him stories. "You have your mother's determination," he told the infant seriously. "I can see it in your eyes already." As Sam grew, the ranch prospered. Will's horse breeding program was a success, with buyers coming from as far away as Sacramento and San Francisco to purchase their stock. Georgia had to cut back on her shooting demonstrations and lessons during Sam's first year, but she never lost her skill. She practiced when she could, and Will would sometimes find her at sunset, running through her draw and shooting drills while Sam napped. When Sam was 2 years old, Georgia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1882, they welcomed a daughter they named Catherine Rose. She was a calm baby compared to her brother, with her father's hazel eyes and her mother's dark hair. "Our family is complete," Georgia said one evening as she nursed Catherine while Will helped Sam build a tower out of wooden blocks. "It is perfect," Will agreed. The children grew up on the ranch, learning to ride almost before they could walk. Sam was fearless, constantly climbing things and getting into mischief. Catherine was more cautious, but she had a keen intelligence and asked endless questions about everything she saw. On Sam's 5th birthday, Will gave him his first pony, a gentle mare named Buttercup. "But Papa," Sam said, "when do I get to learn to shoot like Mama?" Georgia and Will exchanged glances. "When you are 7, Georgia said, "if you can prove you are responsible enough to handle the lessons." "I will be responsible," Sam promised solemnly. "I promise." True to his word, Sam worked hard to prove himself over the next 2 years. When he turned 7, Georgia began teaching him the same way her father had taught her, emphasizing safety and respect for the weapon above all else. Will joined the lessons, and they became family time, all of them working together. Catherine wanted to learn too, and by the time she was 6, she was joining the shooting lessons. She proved to have a natural talent that rivaled her mother's, though Sam was no slouch either. The sight of the entire Garrett family practicing their marksmanship became a familiar one to anyone passing by their ranch. The years passed peacefully. Will and Georgia's ranch became one of the most successful in the county, known for quality horses and the remarkable woman who could outshoot anyone. They added more land to their original 160 acres, built additional barns and a bunkhouse for the hands they eventually hired. Uncle Samuel lived to see both his great-niece and great-nephew grow into capable young people. He passed away peacefully in his sleep when he was 78, and Georgia mourned him deeply, but she was grateful for all the years they had together. He had given her a home when she needed one and supported her when she chose her own path. Sam grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's determination. He loved the ranch and the horses, and it was clear he would take over the operation someday. Catherine was brilliant and independent, talking about becoming a doctor or maybe a lawyer. Ambitious dreams for a young woman in the 1890s, but ones her parents supported completely. If your mother can be the best shot in 3 counties and run a successful ranch, you can be whatever you want to be, Will told her. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Will and Georgia took a rare evening just for themselves, riding up to the creek where they had their first picnic all those years ago. The spot looked much the same, though the trees were taller, and their own hair had streaks of gray now. "Do you remember that first day?" Will asked as they sat by the water. "When I asked if you would teach me or marry me or both?" "How could I forget?" Georgia laughed. "I thought you were either very brave or completely insane. Maybe both," he admitted. "But I knew what I wanted the moment I saw you. You were standing in the middle of Main Street like you owned the world, and I thought I had never seen anyone so magnificent." "I love you, Will Garrett," Georgia said, leaning against his shoulder. "You made good on your promise. You have stood beside me as an equal all these years." "It was easy," he said, "because you are my equal, in every way that matters." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Georgia thought about that frightened young woman who had arrived in Murphy's all those years ago, running from grief and her mother's choices. She had not known then that she would find not just a safe harbor, but a true home, and a love that would sustain her through everything life brought. The years continued to be good to the Garrett family. Sam married a sweet-natured young woman named Elizabeth and brought her to live on the ranch, taking over more of the day-to-day operations. Catherine went to San Francisco to attend the new women's college there, making her parents intensely proud. Will and Georgia became grandparents when Sam and Elizabeth had twins, a boy and a girl they named William and Georgia. "You do not have to name them after us," Georgia protested, but she was secretly thrilled. When Sam's little Georgia was 5 years old, she asked her grandmother to teach her to shoot. "Papa says you are the best shot he ever saw," the child said, "even better than Grandpa." "Well, I am certainly better than your grandfather," Georgia agreed with a smile, and Will laughed from across the room. So Georgia began teaching another generation, pleased to find her granddaughter had inherited the family talent. The circle was complete in a way, the skills her father had taught her being passed down to her own grandchildren. On their 30th anniversary, Will surprised Georgia by taking her back to Sacramento. They stayed in a nice hotel and walked the streets where she had grown up. Georgia visited her father's grave, bringing flowers and telling Will stories about her childhood. "He would have liked you?" she said, standing beside the headstone. "Papa always said a real man was not threatened by a strong woman. He would have been glad I found you." That evening, as they prepared for bed in their hotel room, Will said, "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What is that?" "That day when I asked if you would teach me or marry me or both, and you said to start with lessons. I think about how close I came to never knowing you. What if you had just said no?" "But I did not say no," Georgia pointed out. "I said yes to the lessons, and that led to everything else." "Best decision you ever made," Will said with a grin. "Second best," she corrected. "The best was saying yes when you proposed at Christmas." In 1898, when Georgia was 42 and Will was 45, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a huge party at their ranch. The entire town of Murphy's came, along with people from surrounding communities. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Tom Crawford, now retired from ranching, gave a toast. 25 years ago, I watched my best ranch hand fall head over heels for the most remarkable woman in California. I thought he was crazy, asking her to marry him after barely knowing her. But Will Garrett knew what he wanted, and Georgia Zimmerman knew a good man when she saw one. They have built something special here, not just a successful ranch, but a true partnership. Here is to 25 more years. Everyone cheered and drank, and then Sam called for quiet. "My parents taught me a lot of things," he said. "How to ride, how to handle horses, how to run a business. But the most important thing they taught me was how to treat your partner with respect. I have never heard my father speak a demeaning word to my mother. I have never seen him try to diminish her accomplishments or take credit for her work. And I have never seen my mother act like she needed my father to complete her, only like she chose him and kept choosing him every day. That is what real love looks like. Georgia felt tears streaming down her face, and Will wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Our children turned out pretty well, he whispered. They did, she agreed. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Georgia and Will sat on their porch swing, the same one Will had built 30 years ago when they first moved onto the land. The stars were bright overhead, and the night air was soft and warm. Do you ever regret it? Will asked quietly. Marrying me, settling down. You could have traveled, done so many things. Georgia turned to look at him, taking in his face that she knew better than her own. He had some gray in his hair now, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But he was still the same man who had stood nervously before her that August day in 1878, asking if she would teach him or marry him or both. Not for one single moment, she said firmly. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted, Will. A home, a family, a partnership. I am more myself with you than I ever was alone. I love you, Georgia Garrett, he said. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. That is terribly sentimental, she said, but she was smiling. You married a sentimental man. I did, she agreed, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had built a life together through hard work, mutual respect, and deep love. Georgia thought about how she had come to Murphy's all those years ago, broken and angry, and how this town and this man had given her back her ability to trust and hope. The years had not always been easy. They had weathered droughts and illness, difficult financial times and personal losses. But they had faced everything together, never wavering in their commitment to each other and the life they were building. Catherine came home from San Francisco with a law degree and opened a practice in Sacramento, becoming one of the first female lawyers in California. Georgia and Will traveled to attend her graduation, bursting with pride as their daughter received her diploma. You did this, Will told Georgia as they watched. You showed her that women could do anything they set their minds to. We did this, Georgia corrected. You never once told her she could not do something because she was a girl. Sam took over the ranch completely when Will turned 60, though Will remained active and involved. He loved working with his grandchildren, teaching them the same skills he had learned from Tom Crawford and from Georgia. The ranch continued to prosper under Sam's management, and the Garrett name was respected throughout the region. In 1905, Murphy's organized a special celebration for the town's 50th anniversary. As part of the festivities, they held a shooting competition, and several people asked if Georgia would participate. She was 49 years old now, and she had not competed in years. I do not know, she told Will. My eyes are not what they used to be. Try it, he encouraged. What is the worst that could happen? So Georgia entered the competition, and to her surprise and delight, she won. Her shots were not quite as fast or as precise as they had been in her youth, but her fundamental skill was still there. The crowd gave her a standing ovation, and the mayor presented her with a special award recognizing her as Murphy's most famous resident. Georgia Zimmerman Garrett has been an inspiration to this community for 27 years, the mayor said. She has shown us that skill and determination know no gender. She has built a successful business with her husband, raised two remarkable children, and never stopped being true to herself. We are honored to call her one of our own. That night, after all the celebrations had ended, Georgia and Will lay in bed talking about the day. Do you remember what you said that first day? Georgia asked. When you asked if I would teach you or marry you or both? How could I forget? Will replied. It was the boldest thing I ever said in my life. You got both, Georgia said softly. I taught you to shoot, and I married you, and we built this whole life together. Best deal I ever made, Will said, pulling her close. In 1910, they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary quietly, just family gathering at the ranch for dinner. Sam and Elizabeth were there with their 5 children. Catherine came from Sacramento with her husband Robert, a fellow lawyer she had married 3 years earlier, and their infant son. As Georgia looked around the table at her family, she felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what her father had wanted for her, she thought. Not just safety or security, but a life lived fully and on her own terms. She had found a man who loved her for her strength, not despite it. She had built something meaningful with her own hands. She had passed her skills and values down to the next generation. What are you thinking about? Will asked quietly. How lucky I am, she said. How blessed. As the years continued to pass, Will and Georgia grew old together with the same grace they had brought to everything else in their marriage. They took long walks around their property, remembering when they had first seen this land and imagined what it could become. They sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their children and grandchildren. When Will turned 70, he told Georgia he wanted to take her back to Texas to show her where he had grown up. They made the journey by train, a luxury that would have been unimaginable when they were young. Will showed her the ranch where his family had lived, now owned by someone else, but still recognizable. They visited his parents' graves, and he told her stories about his childhood. "I wish they could have known you," he said. "My mother especially. She would have adored you." "I wish I could have known them too," Georgia said. "They raised a good man." On the train ride home, Will said, "Thank you for indulging an old man's nostalgia." "You are not that old," Georgia protested. "And besides, I wanted to see where you came from. It helps me understand you better, even after all these years." "Do you feel like you understand me?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Most of the time," she said with a smile. "And the rest of the time, you still surprise me. I like that about you." In 1915, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The family gathered again, and this time there were great-grandchildren running around, the next generation of Garretts. Sam's oldest son, William, was engaged to be married, and Catherine's children were growing up smart and ambitious like their mother. 40 years, Will marveled as they stood together watching the party. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Georgia said. "Sometimes I still feel like that 22-year-old girl who won a shooting competition and met a bold cowboy. And I still feel like that nervous 25-year-old asking if you would teach me or marry me or both," Will said. "Best question I ever asked." "Best answer I ever gave," Georgia replied. They were slower now, their bodies showing the wear of 70-plus years and a lifetime of hard work. But their minds were still sharp, and their love for each other had only deepened with time. They knew each other completely, could finish each other's sentences, could communicate with just a look. In the spring of 1918, Will caught pneumonia. At 79 years old, his body did not fight it off the way it might have when he was younger. Georgia nursed him tirelessly, but despite her care and the doctor's best efforts, he grew weaker. On a warm April evening, with Georgia holding his hand and their children gathered around, Will squeezed her fingers weakly. "Thank you," he whispered, "for saying yes, for all of it." "Thank you for asking," Georgia said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for every day we had together." "Love you," he managed. "Always." "Always," she echoed. He slipped away peacefully a few hours later, surrounded by the family they had built together. Georgia sat beside him for a long time after, holding his hand and remembering the remarkable life they had shared. The funeral was the largest Murphys had ever seen. People came from all over the county to pay their respects to Will Garrett, a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. They told stories about his kindness, his skill with horses, his unwavering devotion to his wife and family. Georgia stood at the graveside, flanked by her children and grandchildren, and listened to the words. But she did not need anyone to tell her who Will had been. She had known him better than anyone, had loved him more deeply than she thought possible. He had been her partner, her friend, her love for 40 years. And now he was gone. In the months that followed, Georgia struggled with the loss. The ranch felt empty without Will, even surrounded by family. Sam tried to convince her to move into the main house with him and Elizabeth, but Georgia insisted on staying in the home she and Will had built together. "This is where I feel closest to him," she explained. "I can still feel his presence here." She found comfort in routine, in the daily work of living. She visited Will's grave often, bringing flowers and telling him about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She sat on the porch swing they had shared for so many years and felt him beside her in memory, if not in body. Catherine came to visit frequently, worried about her mother living alone, but Georgia assured her she was all right. "I am sad, yes," she told her daughter, "but I am also grateful. 40 years with a man who loved me completely, who respected me as an equal, who made me laugh and supported my dreams. Not everyone gets that." One afternoon, Georgia's granddaughter, the younger Georgia, who everyone called Georgie to distinguish her from her grandmother, came to visit. She was 21 now, with her grandmother's dark hair and skill with firearms. She sat on the porch swing beside Georgia and asked, "How did you know Grandpa was the right one?" Georgia thought about the question, remembering that August day in 1878 when a nervous cowboy had asked if she would teach him or marry him or both. "He saw me," she said finally. "Really saw me. Not who he wanted me to be or who society said I should be, but who I actually was. And he loved that person. I want that," Georgie said wistfully. "What you and Grandpa had." "Then do not settle," Georgia advised. "Do not marry someone because it is convenient or expected. Wait for someone who makes you feel like your best self, who challenges you and supports you and loves you exactly as you are." In the summer of 1920, Murphy's organized another anniversary celebration, this time for the 75th year since the town's founding. They asked Georgia to speak at the ceremony, to share her memories of the town and her life there. She stood before a crowd of hundreds, at 74 years old, still straight-backed and clear-eyed, and told them her story. She talked about arriving as a young woman, uncertain and grieving. She talked about the shooting competition, where she met Will, about his bold proposal, about the life they had built together on faith and hard work. "Will Garrett asked me if I would teach him to shoot, or marry him, or both," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "I did both, and it was the greatest adventure of my life. We built this ranch together, raised our children here, became part of this community. Murphy's gave me a home when I needed one, and I have tried to give back to this town in return." The crowd gave her a standing ovation that went on for several minutes. Afterward, people came up to thank her, to share their own memories of Will, to tell her what an inspiration she had been to them. Georgia lived for 3 more years after that, active and engaged until the very end. She continued to give shooting lessons to young people in town, passing on the skills her father had taught her. She played with her great-grandchildren and told them stories about their great-grandfather. She tended her garden and sat on her porch swing and lived each day fully. On a crisp October morning in 1923, Georgia passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 77. Her family found her in her bed, a slight smile on her face, as if she had died dreaming of something pleasant. On her nightstand was a photograph of her and Will on their wedding day, young and full of hope and love. They buried her beside Will, under the oak tree they had planted together when they first built their house. The headstone read, "Georgia Zimmerman Garrett, 1856-1923. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she could outshoot every man in town." At the funeral, Sam spoke about his mother with tears running down his face. "My mother taught me that strength comes in many forms," he said. "She was tough as nails when she needed to be, but also gentle and kind. She never let anyone tell her what she could or could not do, and she loved my father with a fierce, unwavering loyalty that inspired everyone who knew them." Catherine spoke next, talking about how her mother had encouraged her ambitions when other parents were pushing their daughters toward traditional roles. "She told me I could be anything I wanted to be," Catherine said, and then she showed me how by living her own life with courage and integrity. I am the woman I am today because of her example. In the years that followed, the story of Georgia and Will Garrett became part of Murphy's history, told and retold to each new generation. The ranch remained in the family, prospering under Sam's management and eventually passing to his own children. The shooting competition became an annual tradition, with the winner receiving the Georgia Garrett Memorial Trophy. People remembered Georgia as the woman who could outshoot every man in town, but also as someone who had shown that strength and femininity were not mutually exclusive. They remembered Will as the bold cowboy who had known what he wanted and asked for it directly, who had spent 40 years proving that he meant every word of his proposal. But, more than anything, they remembered the love story, how a grieving young woman and a hopeful young man had found each other in a dusty mining town and built something beautiful together, how they had respected each other as equals, supported each other's dreams, and faced life's challenges side by side, how they had created a partnership that endured for 4 decades and influenced everyone who knew them. The ranch still stood, a testament to what 2 people could build when they worked together with love and mutual respect. The house Georgia and Will constructed with their own hands sheltered their descendants for generations. The land they nurtured continued to produce fine horses that were known throughout California and beyond. And on quiet evenings, if you stood by their graves under the oak tree, some people swore you could almost hear them, the echo of laughter and conversation, 2 voices in harmony, still together, even in death, as they had been in life. Georgia Zimmerman and Will Garrett, the woman who could outshoot every man in town, and the cowboy who had asked her to teach him, to marry him, to share her life with him. She had said yes to all of it, and that yes had echoed through the decades, creating ripples that touched countless lives. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived on the ranch, still told the story of how their family began with a bold question and an equally bold answer on a dusty street in Murphys, California in 1878. It was a love story for the ages, built not on grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but on daily choices to honor and respect and cherish each other. It was a reminder that true partnership requires seeing your spouse as an equal, celebrating their strengths rather than feeling threatened by them, and choosing love actively every single day. And so, the story lived on, inspiring each new generation to seek that same kind of love, that same kind of partnership, to be bold enough to ask for what they wanted, brave enough to say yes to adventure, and committed enough to build something lasting. Georgia and Will's legacy was not just the prosperous ranch or the successful descendants, but the example they had set of what marriage could be when two people came together as true equals, united in love and respect and shared purpose. Their story proved that you could be strong and independent and still choose to share your life with someone, that you could maintain your identity while building a partnership, that the best love stories were not about one person completing another, but about two complete people choosing to walk through life together, each making the other better, stronger, more fully themselves. And it all began with a simple question on a hot August day. Will you teach me, or marry me, or both? The answer had been both, and from that answer had grown a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a testament to the power of mutual respect, genuine partnership, and enduring devotion. It was everything a love story should be, written not in poetry but in the daily actions of two people who loved each other well and truly for 40 remarkable years.